So just want to say you're all very welcome to Limerick. It's a great city. Delighted to work hosting this conference here. And you're probably well aware that we are served by the Institute of Technology, which we're in at the moment, which is my former alma mater. And I'm delighted to be here. We have a university, and we have a teacher training college, each of which is regionally and nationally important, as well as we have schools, training centres, which provide local supporter education. The equality in education aspect of the conference is very important to me, especially as although Limerick has really progressed and prospered in the last number of years after the economic crash, our region still does face some difficult challenges, such as the location of the most disadvantaged area in the country, according to the Poland's Deprivation Index. And 8 out of the top 10 unemployment black spots in the state are located here in Limerick City. The LIT campus itself touches one of Limerick's unemployed black spots, and you see that up back though. Nationally, our unemployment rate has fallen to below 6%, which is very welcome, but youth unemployment remains stubbornly high at 11.9%. And we need to tackle these issues, and that is why we need to look at education as a starting point in remedying these inequalities. Education is a great leveller, and access to education and quality education has been shown to reduce inequality and help marginalised overcome barriers of deprivation and discrimination. I'm a keen advocate myself of the use of apprenticeships for training and education for our young people, as this method opens up opportunities to many young people for which the traditional university courses do not suit. I'm very anxious to see this area greatly expanded across Ireland in the coming years. There is a lot of work yet to do in forging a truly egalitarian society in Ireland and internationally. Education will play a key role in delivering this. So I want to just finish off by commending Leonie and Riada for organising this conference, and hope you all find the discussions today engaging, useful and very enlightening. And I now hand over to my colleague Liadh, who will give a brief presentation.
I will be brief. Maurice. Before I start off, I really want to thank my own office, who have done tremendous work. These conferences don't just happen of their own accord, and I know that Martin Party was there, and Conor and Deirdre and Oldrin and Brussels have done huge work to pull this together, so my huge thanks to them in advance before we start off at all. So look, it's fantastic with Slua, Homa and Sulling enough. The outstanding response that we received from the moment we announced this conference, I think, is both a cause for concern, but it's also a cause for hope. This is a start of a conversation that we're having. We're not going to solve everything today, but at least it's the beginning of something that we can hopefully build on. I think it's a cause for concern for so many people, whether they be students, parents, or those working within the sector. They recognise that there are huge issues with how education is delivered in Ireland, but a cause of hope because so many of you are so determined to do something about it. There exists within this room, I think, the nucleus of a movement that can be the catalyst to change Irish education, and we all know that change is badly needed. The problems we face are too many to address in any one single conference. Children with special needs still face enormous barriers when it comes to accessing education. Schools at all levels are criminally underfunded. Newly qualified teachers are treated appallingly. Young people are being priced out of higher education, and children from socioeconomically deprived areas are dropping out at alarming rates. We have immigrant children which are being denied basic rights. We have a gender inequality, particularly in the upper echelons of our education system. We have huge deficiencies and problems coming down the track, and they're having to the Ardana. More to ask for Muntori Gaelga on Shinrod, Ufasach, and Hurincha, Rod Fos. It's doing huge damage to our identity and to the nurturing of our language. And these are just some of the issues at the tip of the iceberg. But I'm not here to outline all the problems facing the sector, as you here know only too well what they are. Nor am I here to offer any solutions to those myriad of problems. I'm here just to listen to what you have to say. We have a phenomenal panel of advocates and experts here from across Europe who can bring new ideas and new approaches to our education sector. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from them. But the greatest wealth of knowledge we have is you, all of you here in this room, because nobody knows better how to tackle these issues than yourselves. So again, like I said, I'm here to listen to you so that we can help and that you can help shape our future policy when it comes to education, so that when eventually Sinn Féin will go into government, or when we go to the European Union to lobby for funds, we can clearly outline what the problems are and what needs to be done about it, more importantly. How best to get funds and resources into the hands of people who can enact the necessary change. I want to take away from this event a deeper understanding of the issues that we face and the solutions that we need. And I want you to take away from this event the realisation that you have allies within the political system who do want to help. Mostly, however, I want you to leave here re-energised with the feeling that you've been heard, that something has begun, that the landscape is shifting, and that a powerful movement can start arising out of this. To others, language like that might seem to be hokey, but when speaking to educators, to students or to parents who know only too well the mountain that needs to be climbed, I trust that you will understand my passion about this. I am a mother of 3 kids, so I think that also probably drives me that bit further as well, because I see what's going to happen with their future. So I have that kind of hands-on experience of the school system. And I think this is important to say as well, in a famous article entitled "The Murder Machine," Father Pearse was scathing of the education system in Ireland. He wrote, "Into it is fed all the raw human material in Ireland. It seizes upon it inexorably and rends and compresses and remolds, and what it cannot refashion after the regulation pattern it ejects, with all the likeness of its former self crushed from it, a bruised and shapeless thing, thereafter accounted waste." His language is theatrical and impassioned, but I think his point is undeniable. Learners are not uniform. Some excel at academia, others work best with their hands, some flourish with support, others crave independence, some speak different languages, some speak with their hands. All of them need confidence, all of them need direction, and they're all different and all equally valid. To try and judge them by a single system and to measure them against a so-called norm standard is not only to fail, but is to fail them. So I'm hoping that this group of people that are here will take that on board in our discussions for the afternoon. I will have to finish by saying encouragingly that Pearse ends his essay on an upbeat note. He writes that a reformed education system is not only possible, but essential. So I would urge, he says, that the Irish school systems of the future should give freedom. Freedom to the individual school, freedom to the individual teacher, and freedom as far as many may to be to the individual pupil. For without freedom there could be no right growth, and education is properly the fostering of the right of growth of personality. So I'm sure we all know those personalities that are only dying to be nurtured and developed in the right way so that they can be the best they can be at whatever path they choose in life. I'm now going to move on to our first speaker. I would ask, however, that our speakers will keep it short. And I know everybody's been kind of given a certain amount of time, 10 or 15 minutes, but I always am a fan of more interactive dialogue from our listeners, because I'm here to listen and we're all here to listen to what you have to say. So rather than being a very formulaic thing where we're just throwing information at you, I would encourage everybody to ask questions and to get engaged in the conversation. And let's kind of stop this, we're up here, you're there, and try and bridge that divide. So without further ado, without further delay, I would really like to present you with Professor Kerstin. She's our keynote speaker, Vice President for Academic Affairs in the University of Limerick. She took up the role of Vice President Academic Affairs and Student Engagement at the University in April 2018. She's a whole load of other credentials going, and I'm sure you all have the biogs here, and I'm not going to waste time reading it out. So I would like to give a huge full applause to Kerstin, please.
And for the invitation to speak today. I would preface my short presentation with 3 things. First of all, I'm relatively new to the Irish system. I've worked in the UK, the German systems. I know the German-speaking systems very well. Secondly, I will mount the horse from the back, if one may say so, by looking in the second part of my presentation at higher education, as that is the area of practice, and I do not speak as an education researcher, but as a practitioner in higher education, and that has informed my thoughts. So without further ado, I give you a very brief note on access, some thoughts on access, a bit of global context, national context, and then I would like to focus on models of value and the practice of learning. Nelson Mandela said education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And the question is how one can acquire these weapons in an equitable fashion and how can one wield it effectively. That brings to the four notions of access. As you know, access is very much based on the concept of equity, i.e. a fairness to access education linked to the thought of social justice. It requires a whole education approach, i.e. all levels of education need to pull in one direction, but it also depends on specific national and regional contexts. Access is only one dimension of equity. The others are the curriculum, the values on which our learning offer is being based. For instance, what do we define as academic excellence? What do we define as talent? What disciplinary, cultural and social reference frameworks are being communicated through our curriculum and create notions of belonging or notions of exclusion? How is learning relevant for contemporary society and for the individual? What learning gains are being achieved and what qualifications are being given and how can these be meaningfully applied to opportunities in professional lives, for personal development and for the development of society? Equity and fairness are closely linked. They connect to the availability of places in the education system, to accessibility of these places, and to the stratification of offers within the education system, i.e. a differentiation of offers. Equity looks at the equality of opportunity, not the equal treatment of everyone. One could, and there are different schools of thought, as you know, the equalitarian notion said everyone should have the same access to education. The resources should be distributed equally, and the opportunities. And the kind of school of thought that promotes the sufficiency argument is that there is a minimal level to which all people should be raised, but inequality beyond that point is acceptable. So if one goes with the second thought, then one would have to ask, what is the acceptable level? Is it the leaving cert in its different articulations, or what is it? Let me give you a brief slide. I hope you can read it. We are facing major changes to society, to our economy, to the way we live, work, communicate, socialize. But that raises the question, what are we educating for? And that question is equally underlined by the notion, and the Economic World Forum has raised that notion, that 65% or thereabout of current primary school children will enter professions that we don't yet know. So what is the relevance of the education on offer and how we educate at present? The World Economic Forum also asserts that the competencies, the skills in their work context or professional life context change, so that from creativity, that was in 10th place in 2015, that has moved radically to the third place in 2020. Critical thinking and complex problem solving remain very important. But again, how do we instill these competencies in our students from an early age onwards, and how can they be meaningfully applied? In the key trends for higher education, I would like to highlight one fact. We are, in the global context, seeing an increase from 99.4 million students enrolled in higher education in 2000 to 414 prognosed for 2030. It's an enormous, it's a phenomenal growth. However, that growth is not necessarily a growth of opportunity and access for all. It is, in the main, a growth for the middle classes in a global context. And I leave it at that. In the national context, equity of access to higher education has been articulated as a policy assertive aim in the plan for 2015-2019, and you will be familiar with the notion that as a country, Ireland has everything to gain and nothing to lose by increasing levels of participation in higher education among all Irish citizens, and that the benefits that individuals derive from higher education are also wider and economic and social benefits. The educated workforce as an economic asset, and education as a driver of the economic progress and of the innovation ecology, and also as a means to tackle skills shortages in particular sectors, particularly ICT, pharma, and other areas. And the big ambition was to ensure that the student body entering, participating, and completing higher education at all levels reflects the diversity and social mix of Ireland's population. That also means that the value base on which this education is being placed also reflects that diversity. Oh, that was a bit quick. And I wanted to show you a few targets. So the government targets are that 2.18 million people are in employment by 2020, that the participation of 25 to 64-year-old people engaged in lifelong learning will rise by 10% in 2020 and 15% by 2025. The current baseline, according to the ATA, is 6.7%. There should be an increase in flexible learning, i.e. blended learning, online learning, distance learning, part-time to 20%, and tertiary attainment amongst 30 to 34-year-olds should rise to 60%, which would be one of the highest rates in the European Union. Opportunities should be created, and the University of Limerick has worked very hard to do so, to enable every student to have a work placement or work-based project by 2025, and there should be an uptake of foreign languages, including migrant languages, modern foreign languages, but also Irish within the higher education system as part of a university course studied by, or higher education course studied by 20% in 2016. And in terms of the access targets, these are being taken from the National Access Plan into the higher education performance framework, a rise of semi and unskilled manual workers from 26 to 35%, manual worker groups to 30%, full-time matured students from 13 to 16%, full and part-time mature students from 19 to 24%, students with disability from 6 to 8%, and part-time and flexible participation to 22%. These are very ambitious targets, but they require a higher education system that is funded sufficiently to enable access, to support equality of opportunity, to maintain the quality of education, because massification, an increase in participation rate should not lead to a massification and a decline in quality. It also means that we think about how we enable access to higher education. As you know, academic preparedness and performance, as well as tuition fees, and you mentioned that earlier, are key ingredients to current access to higher education. But how do we measure academic performance? How do we assess academic preparedness? Parents are in the Irish system, and I thought that is fantastic, anchored as first educators. So they play a very important role to inform students' choice in their educational development. But I would also argue that the communities in which students socialize and live have a very important role to play in order to highlight the relevance of education attainment and also of professional futures. For instance, looking at professions that are seen worthwhile undertaking, and therefore encouraging children and students to develop their competencies and insights, their creativity and imagination in ways that supports taking up these professional careers. Role models as teachers in schools are very important role models, and the Access Plan has emphasized the role that teachers play in schools in order to support particularly students from disadvantaged backgrounds to engage in the education system and to move into higher education. But equally important are mentors, access students as mentors. And in our destination college project, we use our access students or access alumni as mentors for new access students to support them entering higher education system and making a success of it. I've talked about the value base. That is, we have to actually very critically reveal what is the powerful knowledge on which institutions, on which our acquisition of knowledge resides in order to support students to develop identifications, belongings, and a very critical lens of what is being taught. Our learning environment is a huge barrier to access for disabled students, physically, but also in technological terms. We have huge opportunities to use technological progress to support the development of educational assistive technologies, not only to support students with disabilities, but to support the very different styles of learning and personalize the learning, i.e. moving away from a massification and industrialist approach to education to a much more personal approach that supports the development of individual talent. And we have to mainstream support, i.e. we have to offer support for all our students in order to support success. And when I say mainstreaming support, I mean that in an equitable manner, i.e. recognizing that a diversified student body has very diverse needs for support, and we have to realize that. But therefore, we also need funding in higher education. And last but not least, in order to support lifelong learning, we need a diversity and a flexibility of routes in education. Currently, the way our programs are structured makes it difficult for people with very different life plans and responsibilities to enter higher education without making huge sacrifices, and it privileges those who can afford it or have support to do so. Looking at it from the perspective of the learner, these are the expectations in the circles around that many students have on contemporary education according to polls of students. Again, when we look at developing students' agility, flexibility, their ability to reflect critically, to network, to develop leadership competencies, and to display resilience, we always have to ask, what is the value base? On which criteria we base our education? And I'm wrapping up now by showing the last slide on equality of opportunity for learners. We need to firmly base our education on students as co-creators so that we don't just teach content, but also the context in order to critically be able to operate with the knowledge received, i.e. we have to focus on the know-how through challenge-based and problem-based learning, through promoting project and teamwork with appropriate assessments that just not focuses on the individual merit and achievements, and we have to invest into more flexible and personalized learning. And I would like to finish with a quote from Socrates. Socrates said, "Education is the kindling of a flame, not the filling of a vessel." And in order, these are my words now, in order to kindle this flame, a holistic, integrated, and inclusive approach to education is absolutely required. Thank you very much.
Marques, of course, I was being incredibly subtle there, handing him a note which everybody saw, saying to wrap it up. So you all know that I am absolutely going to be very strict when it comes to speakers, again, so that you can participate. Tom at the top, towards the panel, and we have a fantastic list of speakers. Tom from Cosno, Barry and Barry O'Connor was from the Cork Institute of Technology, fellow Corkonian. sure. So you have the floor back. You can sit down, stand up. Can you all hear him firstly in the back as well? Project voice, so everybody can hear.
Daisy can hear you in the book on in the back.
Right. Goedemiddag Margaret, agus goedemiddag as dan kure hoort om taken zorgen maken. Kadere meer is toen ik nog leeg wordt slow van massa zeggen zorgen maken. Agus zinnen overdovisch town de course dafish the course doen don't hear so. The fact that we have so many people here this lovely Saturday morning in Limerick IT is fantastic. And I guess, keep an eye on the watch now, I guess we could look at the problems and we could look at, I suppose, the societal issues around surrounding education. I have sat just yesterday week, I'm chairman of a primary school board and Daisy Grady's old alma mater on Bannister Cruig or on Bannister Huig in Cork, and I sat and done it for a number of years now, watching young national teachers coming in, fully qualified, with level 8s from recorder and coaching badges in hurling and rugby and swimming, and they've done years overseas and so on, competing against each other, beating each other up to get maternity leave covers and so on. I think it's bananas, but that's part of the issue. It's about prioritising education, but I guess, you know, and I'm lucky here this morning that Deirdre Creedon, our access manager from CIT, Dennis Barrett, our colleague within the Learning City operation in Cork. I guess looking at maybe how we might address some of the issues and some of the examples that we've used in Cork. And as you know, Cork is A, B, C, D, as we say. But Cork is different, right? Just remember that, right? The A, B, C, D of education. But seriously, like, we have to look at education as a continuum. And we've worked, particularly in CIT now, we work all the way through from people with special needs. We have an advocacy group for COPE who come in every year and they do a 6 weeks course on advocacy. They were up in the City Hall there and some night during the week for a community ward in Cork. All the way through from that, all the way through to PhDs, including apprenticeships. I might come back to apprenticeships in a minute. But there are, for me at least anyway, having dealt with, I'm sitting on the board as well at the College of Commerce in Cork, which is the largest FE college in Cork. There's, like, education now is extremely structured, extremely slow to move. You know, so for me anyway, I think the answer is, like, a lot of the work that Deirdre has spearheaded in CIT, a lot of the work is coming at this from another angle. You know, there are various ways of engaging people into education, whether it's people just getting advocacy courses, whether it's people picking up the odd modules in terms of a third level program, whether it's people going back to school to learn maths before they come into the third level. And let's be sure, like, getting into third level and getting a third level degree is not the be all and end all. In fact, to me, I find it kind of, having spent 25 years in UCC, 12 now outside in CIT, it is not the holy grail. We do compliment ourselves on the number of people who are attending third level in Ireland, but sure, we all know the main reason that is there were no jobs. You got a bachelor's degree, then you got a master's, then you have to get a PhD, then you get a postdoc. Why? Because there were no jobs. So, you know, we kind of pat ourselves in the back on that. For a good number of years, I've looked at the figures in terms of even at that access to higher education. And in spite of the free fees, in spite of so-called free fees, in spite of the grant system, there has been no real uptake in third level places from people from disadvantaged areas. You know, so I think there's another way around it. I think the other way around it is honest what we've actually done in Cork, and not just flying the Cork flag now, but we have attacked. Cork has been branded as a global learning city by UNESCO, and that doesn't come cheaply. It is built on the back of voluntary effort. And when we had, I'm not sure Dennis will be speaking about this later on, but we had a visit. We were putting in a pitch for this UNESCO Lifelong Learning Conference in Cork last September. We had a visit from the higher echelons of UNESCO to see how we're getting on. But the previous two conferences on learning cities were in Mexico City and Beijing. Not exactly the same as Cork, right? But the motto we had for the Cork conference was, you get it right, Dennis, local action, global impact. But when they came in to view our application, they found ourselves from CIT, our colleagues from UCC, the NAPD, Mary King's operation, the HSC, and the City Council. And we all know each other. We're all working towards the same goal. And this is amazing because obviously Beijing was slightly more structured as was Mexico. I know there's great activity here in Limerick as well with Doras. My point is this, is that I think we need to come at it from outside. If you're trying to break the system, and the murder machine, Liadh, if we try to break the system, that will be at it for a year and a day. It's a bit like the goat hitting the dam, But I think there are huge possibilities out there for people getting together and see such a diverse group here this morning from different angles of education. We can actually free up that logjam and get people into education and getting value for education, not necessarily getting a degree. Again, going back to Deirdre, was it 2 weeks ago, Deirdre, we were above in Cork prison, where we presented certificates to the prisoners in Cork jail, right? An amazing collaboration between the prison service and CIT, and I know Cork ETV are there as well. And the pride on those prisoners getting certificates from us in terms of participation in courses was just amazing, And it goes back to what education is all about. It's about leadership. Those of us who are old enough, who did Latin in school, education is educo, I lead out, and it's about leading out, The French version is formation, which is forming people as you go along. So there are a lot of good examples out there of how you can actually break ignore the system and maybe make some use of the system. People involved in education are committed. They're also educated. They're not in it for the money because it ain't there. So there's a huge wealth out there in terms of the talent in education, in formal education, to actually deliver educational opportunities to people. But again, we do have to keep our pressure on our politicians, to keep the pressure on them. Go back a couple of years ago, we had the National Access Programme, right, run by the HEA. When times got tough, they came along and they developed the springboard courses, which was fine, getting people back into education for employment. Right? But what that did, that was giving people sort of a second chance education. But that happened at the expense of first time chance education. The programs we had to support kids coming into university, into technology or the AP colleges, they were dropped down the pecking order. Okay, there's a reason for it. They were trying to get people back into the workforce. So, it's a trade-off that was there between second chance education or the poor unfortunates who weren't even getting the first chance education. And it shouldn't be one or the other. So we have great examples in terms of what we've done in Cork, and I'm just putting it out there because I think what could very easily come out of an event like this now is what they call communities of practice, right? Where people put best practice on the table. Because when we had our colleagues out from Limerick there during the festival this year, we learned a few bits and pieces from them. They learned stuff from us, and with people from Bristol as well. Swansea was it Dennis or Bristol? Bristol, right, first time, yeah. So, there are huge examples out there, but we do need to kind of share our knowledge, share our commitment, and drive on from there. As I said, depending on the state to do it. When we go back to Bunnock na Éireann, what it says in that the state shall provide for the education of its citizens, which basically means handing over the few shillings to the Bradley Priest Tree or to the nuns or to anybody to provide for. So they've put in, that has been tackled a bit now since the Denise, one of the European cases. Louise O'Keefe, thanks. Louise O'Keefe, yeah. But that has been that far has been diluted a bit. But there is a stepping back from the actual education by the government, by the state. So my point is this: that we are educators. We're in this game for the long run. We're very, very lucky because generally speaking, we've all got a good education, thanks to the state. But it's hard enough now to get other people back on the bus. There are a lot of systems out there. The recognition for prior learning, for prior experiential learning, informal learning, non-formal learning. And under EU rules, right, you can actually go all the way to a PhD by recognition of prior learning, by developing your portfolio to get there. So there are huge numbers of examples out there. We could follow examples from the people in France who have a great educational system. You can actually become a fully qualified engineer to the highest standard in France while working. So there are loads of examples out there. I think we need to pool them, we need to drive on, and maybe to finish up in terms of another idea that's out there. And it's not all about third level, but I remember over in the States a few years back, they developed a system where every person in the country was in the particular other states were entitled to say 120 credits of third level learning. You know, and when you pick them up, it's your own business. And we actually were working with colleagues in UL and that a few years ago. We kind of put that proposal together. Didn't get too far. One learning that came from the States was everybody was entitled to 120 credits of third level learning, but they were non-transferable. So you couldn't sell them on to someone else, which is what some of the American people did. You know? So there are loads of examples out there. And as I said, there's a huge wealth of commitment among educationists. There's a huge need for the education. And my fucking Derry, or Mariana Cursi card, Cursi Apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is the most difficult education and training system to get into in this country. My good friend here in Limerick, IT, Tony Wallace, Tony's had a trace there for a long, long time. Great guy, good referee as well. Wrong shape ball, but that's another story. But Tony said, as we say in Limerick Valley, he says, a doctor's son may become a doctor, but a doctor's son may not become a doctor. So there is a opening up in the non-traditional apprenticeships. The traditional apprenticeships are still the most difficult form of education training to get into in this country. So follow me much in.
Okay, Grammy Margaret for that, Barry. They'll be saying I'm biased because you're a fellow Corkonian, which is why I let you speak for as long as you did, but that's not true at all. No, it was all very, very valid points, and I think lots of food for thought. I think it'd be very interesting to come back to the whole idea of apprenticeships later on, but that's, and I might talk about that later myself in terms of European thinking and where we're going with it. Leonie, Kerins, Doras, Luimní, you have the floor.
Great, thank you, Leah. Thank you for this initiative, and thank you for the invitation to participate. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Doras and the angle that we're coming from. I'm going to give you an example of some institutional discrimination with a particular focus on the access to education of asylum seekers. And then I'm also going to highlight some of the positive initiatives that have been taking place in various third level institutions. So Doras is a Limerick-based migrant support and human rights-based organisation, and we work to promote and protect the rights of all migrants in Ireland. A core area of our work is supporting people who are seeking asylum and those with refugee status to realise their basic human rights, including access to education. So through our work, we have witnessed and experienced myriad examples of direct and indirect discrimination in education, affecting people of all ages and circumstances in different ways and at different levels of the education system. From unconscious bias and prejudice of staff to institutional discrimination that limits access to education on grounds of religion, length of residency or emigration status, and the latter is which I'm going to focus on this morning. It's also important to note that we have also experienced and supported several positive initiatives here in Limerick and across Ireland in schools, colleges and universities, despite the institutional barriers that do exist. These initiatives have been driven by motivated and committed individuals in the education sector who have contributed enormously to the lives of the individuals affected by their actions. Examples include developing resources for primary school teachers on migrants' rights issues, on which we worked with Mary I College, supporting a module for the University of Limerick psychology students that challenges negative attitudes towards immigration, and also supporting the University of Limerick Sanctuary Project, which I will speak about shortly. So the rights of asylum seekers living in direct provision in Ireland remains a core issue for Doras and is a key human rights issue for Ireland. Accessing education is an important goal for the majority of people with whom we work and is in many ways the key to successful integration. Institutional and practical barriers to accessing education for migrants exist at many levels. For example, children from different cultural or religious backgrounds, language barriers, school waiting lists and admissions policies. But lack of access to further and third level education for adults seeking asylum is arguably the most significant example with the most negative impact. Primary and secondary education is provided to all children in the asylum process, but upon completing the Leaving Cert, the vast majority of students are unable to progress any further, unlike their friends and peers in school. They have to wait, idle and isolated until they receive either a positive decision on their case or are forced to return to their country of origin. Many of you will know about the direct provision system and the impact it has on individuals forced to live within it. Adults have spent up to 10 years living in shared accommodation in direct provision with a weekly allowance of €20, often in isolated locations and with essentially no right to work, although there are some changes forthcoming. People have access to basic English language classes and sometimes computer classes, but there is no right to access courses beyond QQI level 4. Non-EU fees are applied to asylum seekers, which can total anything from 40 to 60,000 euro for a 4-year degree. Skills people have gained in their country of origin are wasted following a number of years waiting for a decision and no ability to retrain and acquire new skills. People put their careers and skills development on hold, at which point institutionalisation may have affected the individuals and have impacted their mental health considerably, leading to long-term dependency on the state. This has a huge impact on their long-term integration, but also for all members of society. This legal restriction on access to education for asylum seekers also affects refugees and other categories of migrants who have lived in Ireland for less than 3 years, but the impact on asylum seekers may be considered the most significant given the isolation and challenges they experience while living in direct provision. Ultimately, the existing right to education, like the right to work, is not a realistic right in practice. So while the government continues to uphold barriers to education for people seeking asylum, universities and education institutes across Ireland have been leading the way and creating access to education independently. Essentially, the institutional barriers that have been created at government level are slowly being dismantled by education institutes, driven in part by increased public awareness and support, and with thanks to a number of incredibly resilient people speaking out about the challenges they experience while living in direct provision. The recent efforts of universities in Ireland have created and facilitated considerable positive outcomes for people living in direct provision, including here in Limerick, where 17 people have received scholarships to undertake access courses at the university with the hope that they will continue to pursue to degree level in the next academic year. However, this is yet to be confirmed. Similar initiatives have been launched in DCU, NUIG and UCC, with more in the pipeline. Supports provided by the University of Limerick Sanctuary Project include fee waivers, but also a programme of holistic supports covering additional costs, including transport, language supports, laptops, mentoring, and intercultural and refugee awareness events. The qualifications people will attain are just one of the positive outcomes, but the wider integration impact is arguably more significant. People are meeting people from diverse backgrounds and making friends, forming social networks, gaining access to facilities, events and supports that would otherwise have been completely out of reach. These contacts and networks are harder to quantify, but will have a positive impact on the individual's integration into the wider community, on their mental health, on the wider university community, who learn about asylum, protection, and intercultural issues, which all helps to counter negative attitudes and prejudice. So, in conclusion, in the context of equality and anti-discrimination issues in education, removing the institutional barriers to accessing education would have a profound impact on the individual level. Enabling access to education also has the wider and important effect of positively impacting on attitudes and understanding of intercultural issues among staff, fellow students, and the greater community. Thank you.